Trade and aid are likely to be hot topics for African leaders in Sicily. In his budget proposal, US President Donald Trump is planning to cut billions in aid. At the same time, African markets are trying to open up and become more accessible.
I believe that Africa has looked for aid for far too long. We must get to a point where our fundamentals, and Africa, as the second fastest growing continent, we have a population bulge, we'll have more young people, we're innovative. We must create intra-trade amongst Africa, and we must contribute to the global GDP.
We're absolutely hoping for more trade, because there's no point in talking about aid ad infinitum. I think that it's time for Africa now. There are about 1.2, 1.4 billion people in this particular continent. Most of the countries have become very stable politically, and I think that there's a huge opportunity for investment, whether you are talking about infrastructure lines, whether you're talking about the grid lines, in respect of both the generation, transmission and distribution assets that need to be put on the ground.
Ethiopia, Kenya, Nigeria and Tunisia have been invited to the meeting, but there's a notable exception.
Now, it's a long time since I can remember any group of people looking at trade with Africa and South Africa's name not being on that list. This is quite interesting. It's no longer the prime aim of wanting to do business in Africa through the gateway of South Africa.
The economics are fairly straightforward, according to one industry leader.
Those European countries have reached some kind of stalemate when it comes to the markets that they've been servicing up until now. And Africa, here is the time, is now to build that particular level of capital investment.
The consensus is that it's all about trade and less about aid. And it's about the markets that are sitting on this continent here, and it's about getting capital from those developed countries and investing it here. I'm Angelo Coppola for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
And CGTN's Mariam Zaidi is in the Italian town of Taormina and joins us now, of course, with the latest developments from that particular meeting. Mariam, what's the latest from the meeting here?
Well, a few hours ago, leaders had their final roundtable, and honestly, it seemed that not much really happened, or at least not enough decisions or affirmative action on key issues were taken. And that was the concern ahead of this summit. Now, G7 leaders did sign off on a declaration on terrorism. It's showing strong support for the UK following the terror attacks in Manchester. The Italian Prime Minister said it showed unity, commitment and determination to strengthen the fight against terrorism, and that it also showed friendship with the UK. Now, the Italian Prime Minister, speaking after that roundtable, also said that leaders had reached agreement on Syria, Libya, North Korea. And we know that the Japanese Prime Minister had been pushing to find solutions on North Korea, and that the US President Donald Trump, also speaking earlier on in the day, called North Korea a big problem that needed sorting.
Indeed, but what about the other G7 members? What can they do to pressure the US President and Donald Trump specifically into sticking to commitments made to cut emissions under the Paris Accord?
Listening to what the Italian Prime Minister did say following the leaders' roundtable, not much did come out of the meeting, especially on climate change. Now, what the other 6 leaders had wanted was a firm commitment to the Paris climate change agreement from the United States. It seemed that they didn't get it. The Trump administration had been pushing back on calls to endorse the Paris agreement. US officials ahead of the summit said that Trump was still deciding if the US would leave that agreement or not, and that was pretty much what happened. It seemed there was no commitment made here. Instead, it seems that the US will chew over their climate change position a little bit further before deciding either way on the Paris agreement.
Indeed. Finally, Mariam, this summit, of course, is being held in Sicily. It's designed to draw attention to the migrant crisis in the Mediterranean. But given the strong anti-immigrant stances of some of the G7 leaders, should we expect an aggressive stance against all migration from this meeting?
Unfortunately, Rama, it seems that not a lot of problem solving came on migration. It did seem to be America causing that roadblock. Italy wanted to use the backdrop of the summit they're hosting to reinvigorate efforts to resolve the crisis, and specifically to address the resettlement or settlement of refugees. Now, Italy is a country, of course, on the front line of Europe's migration crisis. It has seen some 45,000 arrive on its shores just in 2017 alone, and many NGOs and world organisations had been campaigning ahead of the summit to try to get some real action on saving lives. But we know already that people within Trump's team had been undercutting those efforts. Italy's Prime Minister had met with Trump earlier in the week to try to push efforts forward on migration. If they get nothing from Trump, they could, of course, agree to a 6-to-1 text to put pressure on the United States in the future. Except then, this would then be the first time that the G7 then shows its division.